Good evening, everyone. This is Mike Romelli here at the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion for September 18th, 2019, recorded around 6:52 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hurricane Humberto continues to lash portions of Bermuda here with hurricane force winds now across most of the island at this point, or at least the northern part of the island. We've seen about 104 mile per hour gusts come from the island here. This was likely off of an elevated platform on the island. However, that does suggest that there is relatively strong winds that are impacting the island right now up to hurricane force. I believe the last report that I saw was 74 miles per hour sustained. So that is hurricane force winds sustained across portions of Bermuda. And for that reason, obviously, we have a hurricane warning that has been placed in effect as of really earlier yesterday. That was in effect. So this is expected to remain a major hurricane only for about the next few hours. Maximum sustained winds are holding about 20 miles per hour, but the maximum forward speed has now increased to 20 miles per hour off towards east-northeast. So what this will occur is that really conditions are at its about worst about now through later this evening, and then during the overnight hours things will gradually improve, and by the afternoon tomorrow conditions will rapidly improve for Bermuda. And I do suspect by tomorrow afternoon that most of the impacts from Humberto will be well gone and away from the island. So it's really a very quick, brief event for the island chain itself. There's really not going to be a whole significant amount of prolonged impacts besides swells. And speaking of swells, this will still have an impact of high surf and rip currents threats throughout the whole entire United States. So there is going to be that threat regardless of where you're at across the whole entire United States, the eastern coast of the United States, for rip currents, high surf, stuff like that. And those can and have killed people in the past. So we want people to be aware of those impacts if you live along the eastern coast of the United States. Basically from Florida all the way up through Maine, and even the Canadian maritime regions could see those swells increasing from Humberto. So this will continue to head off towards the east-northeast here, and then eventually turn more towards the north, and then sort of kick out here over the weekend and be of no consequential threat for Bermuda or the United States east coast. Taking a look here, this is the the IR satellite transitioning from visible to the nighttime IR, and right here is Bermuda. Bermuda is right here, and you can see the main impacts from Humberto are occurring now, and Humberto will continue to scurry away at a rather fast pace and increasing end forward speed as it kind of gets the boot from this trough and continues to move on out to sea and be of no consequential threat then for Bermuda after tonight. So again, the worst impacts for Bermuda are now. You can see there is still a nicely well-established upper level outflow. However, you do see what's behind it. There is that drier air that's kind of sinking on this backside here, and this will basically continue to shove this away. This will continue to shove Humberto away, and also then start to weaken it as it begins to undergo an extratropical sort of characteristic take there. We are also watching Tropical Storm Jerry with now maximum sustained winds at 60 miles an hour, west-northwest at about 15 miles an hour. So this is kind of moving rather quickly here at a brisk pace, but needless to say, we have tropical storm watches issued for portions of the Leeward Islands here near the U.S. Virgin Islands, and this does not include the U.S. Virgin Islands at this point in time. Let me just sort of make sure so that it doesn't. So yeah, St. Martin and St. Bartholomew are in these tropical storm watches, and the government of the Netherlands has issued a tropical storm watch for Saba and St. Eurythus. So there is tropical storm watches now that are in effect for portions of the leewards for Tropical Storm Jerry. This is expected to become a hurricane by tomorrow, if not by later tonight, and I'll show you why I think that here in just a second. This is not a very big storm. It is It's not relatively small, but it's not relatively big either. But regardless, there will be impacts to the southern, or I'm sorry, to the northern extent that there will be tropical storm force winds likely within portions of the northern Leeward Islands. Really starting here on Friday as it gets its closest approach on the official forecast from Jerry. Now, there's sort of things that are complicating this track here. One is the fact that depending on the exact intensity here, and this is kind of one where we go with the intensity forecast on this one for what will determine the overall track, is the fact that if this is actually stronger than it is than forecast to be, let's say by Friday, Thursday into Friday, this could have a consequential effect further west. And some of the modeling has been indicating that this sort of gets a little bit further west and sort of tries to sneak in here and turn more west. And the reason because of that is that there's an upper level high here, but it was only felt up in the high atmosphere levels, only up in the higher levels of the atmosphere. And a shallower system like Jerry will not feel that if it is too shallow and too weak. Consequently, if it is stronger and deeper within the atmosphere, this will then start to sort of make that turn and not go on the forecast track. Currently, the forecast track has us turning well away from the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos and moving well north of Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and then closing in then closer to Bermuda again. Again, there's a lot of consequential things to that, and one of the things is that the intensity is going to really matter, really come by Thursday into Friday in this time frame. If this is certainly stronger within this time frame, this has a chance that it will go further west and impact more land areas out here. So that is sort of one thing to monitor. You can see here on the IR satellite, we did have an attempt, a rather recent attempt earlier around really about 3 o'clock or so this afternoon with an attempt to develop a deeper convection. You can see, though, that largely failed, and then we set up shop for another deep convective burst that has sustained itself with very deep convection. But you see the overall appearance has been largely lost. Now, there is still that low-level center in here getting aided by this deeper convection, but you can definitely see there's a lot of dry air in this region. There's a ton of dry air. This upper-level outflow is still pretty well established, but the problem is all this dry air that's on the back of the storm and in front of the storm. If we take a look at the recon, the upper level recon that was in there, this is a little bit north of the storm here, and you can definitely see there is a very dry environment. We had a similar situation with Dorian. When Dorian came through, a lot of this was this drier air, but Dorian was able to sort of make it and survive and thrive within that drier air, drier air environment. So there is a lot to watch here. Again, just because there is a little bit of dry air does not necessarily mean that Jerry will in fact weaken. It is not predicted to do so, but there will be shear, that will be increasing on the storm that might help Jerry to ingest some of this drier air that is to the north of the system currently. So there is a lot of factors that are kind of hinting at maybe this not being as intense by the time it gets to Thursday, by the time it gets to tomorrow and certainly Friday. But again, a lot of this will determine on the overall evolution of how things play out tonight into the day tomorrow, and consequently, if it is stronger, this may in fact try to track a little bit more further to the south and west of the current NHC forecast. But again, so those are the reasons why people in the Lesser Antilles, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, U.S. Virgin Islands need to be paying attention to this, and even the Southern Turks and Caicos there need to be paying attention to this, as you should. It's basically the peak of hurricane season, just a little bit past it. But again, mainly the main impacts are going to be tropical storm force winds on this current path. There is some of the northern Leeward Islands could see tropical storm conditions there. You look at the IR satellite here. This is from the NOAA site here, and you can definitely see that we've seen a rather modest increase within that deeper convection here. You do notice that there is some established upper level outflow here, helping to sort of ventilate the storm, but there is a lot of dry air around it. You notice most of this air across here is relatively dry and stable, so there is not a lot of favorability. Right now it's sort of in a little bit more of a moister pocket, but once it moves further out into this region, there is more hostile dry air. So it will be certainly interesting to see, with regards to the intensity and the track forecast, how this dry air impacts Jerry, if at all. Still, regardless, we are still seeing somewhat interesting from the ADT site that this does suggest that this is nearly a Category 1 hurricane with maximum winds of 63 knots, which is 73 miles per hour, and a pressure of 988 millibars. We do not have any lower level recon that has been in there. That will start during the day tomorrow, I believe. So a lot to watch here with that. Also, not to forget here, we have Tropical Depression Humberto, which is in Texas right now. The main impact from that is going to be extremely heavy rainfall across portions of southern Texas and extreme southwestern Louisiana. Upwards of 10 plus inches could still fall, and there is a high risk of flash flooding across this region for today. So we've already seen nearly almost about 20 inches so far. I believe it's unconfirmed report of about 20 inches of rain near the landfall point. So there was a lot of deep convection this morning that sort of trained over this region in the coastal areas. But again, we are continuing to monitor for the potential for devastating flash flooding across this region. And that's not to hype things up, but you get 10 plus inches of rain, that could be devastating for a lot of low-lying communities, especially right along the coast. That could definitely be devastating there. And even into extreme southwestern Louisiana, you could see anywhere between 4 to 6 inches of rain. So there is a lot going on here, and effects will be felt even into portions of extreme southwestern Arkansas and southeastern Oklahoma. There will be some rain impacts from Humberto, although to a lesser extent of what it is currently across southeastern Texas. Also, one last thing to sort of point out here. But when I did the update here at about 2 o'clock, there was a slight error with these X markers here. So we do have this area of disturbance right here, which has a 30% over the next 5 days. This will be tracking into the southern Lesser Antilles region here. So Trinidad, Tobago, Grenada, Barbados. You have to watch maybe for some sort of tropical disturbance to work its way in, currently with a 30% chance. And this disturbance over here, just south of the Dominican Republic, only has about a 10%, but could bring some pretty heavy rainfall over the next few days to portions of the Dominican Republic. So a lot to keep an eye on here. Again, this is Humberto continuing to move away from Bermuda, but bringing significant impacts as of now. Humberto still bringing significant impacts to the southern Texas coast. And Jerry, which will be eventually Hurricane Jerry, could bring some tropical storm conditions to portions of the northern Leeward Islands by this upcoming Friday or weekend. So a lot to watch here over the next coming days. I'll have another video discussion out by later tomorrow afternoon, probably about by 4 o'clock or so. Hope you all have a great rest of your evening, and I will see you tomorrow.